Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guest is Marty McMahon. He is here to talk about an upcoming event for veterans to share their stories. Welcome to the show, Marty.
Thanks for having me.
So we're having is it a town hall for veterans?
It's a veterans town hall, and it's going to be at Prouty Park on Sunday at 1 o'clock.
Right.
And it's there are a number of them that we're doing around the state, and this one is for Newport.
Right. So this, just so the viewers are aware, that would be Sunday, July
18th.
July 18th.
Right. And then if it's rainy or something like that, it has to be canceled. The rain date is the July 25th.
July 25th. Okay. So these are held throughout the state?
They're actually held all over the country.
Okay.
It began with Sebastian Younger. He did a video called Restrepo about a unit in Afghanistan. And then he wrote a book called Tribe. And in the book, he talked about how veterans coming back have no feeling or connection because they've lost their tribe for when they were in. So when they come back to the community, they feel a disconnect. And part of that, the problem in there is that a lot of civilians have no clue what service is like. So he began this program where veterans would just get up and talk about their service. It's completely non-political. Every view, every perspective is welcome. And we get to learn what a veteran feels about their service. It might be incredible pride. It may be a sense of loss for their brothers. But there are so many pieces to service that are exposed when veterans get up and talk. And the idea is that then civilians can understand what that experience is like and begin to reconnect in their community with the veterans who are there.
Right. While I haven't served a day in the military, my father did retire. He did it full-time and part-time. I have, for the last 25 years probably, I've been recording the stories of area veterans, and I know the producer of the show, one of his favorite shows was when I had Lindy Palin, who was a B-17 bomber pilot during World War II, John Wilson, who was a foot soldier in Vietnam, and then we had his name is escaping me, LaPlante, who served in the current wars or the recent wars, and they were like three kids talking. They were just saying, "Wow," like the young one was saying how he could just get right on his phone and contact home, and Lindy said, your letters home might take a few weeks, and then John would tell things. Well, when he got a letter, it usually included a pack of Kool-Aid to go in his water to dull the taste of the iodine tablets. So they had a lot of, they compared and contrasted what wars were like for them.
There's a lot of that. I mean, there's a real bond, and it goes over years and years and years. One other thing that I do is facilitate a reading group down in Linden with a bunch of veterans, and we read military literature written by veterans from like the Civil War, World War I, World War II, Korea, and the commonality that they find from their service to somebody in the trenches of World War I. It's amazing. I mean, it's just a pretty enlightening experience.
What was really interesting, though? I actually had the opportunity to interview two combat-injured Navy veterans. I interviewed them together. One had been shot in the back. The other one had been blown up on a PT boat off the coast of France. The one who had been shot in the back was Hans Fiedler, German Navy. Had been shot in the back by the Russians, as he said, while trying to play hero. He said, I was the medic, and he said the Russians were shooting at him. He says, I was up there, no flat jacket, and everybody who knew what they were doing were hunkered down. But he said, I was playing hero, got shot in the back. And Ted Chafee, Hans lived in Island Pond. Ted Chaffee, who'd been sunk off the coast of France, those two were like, you would swear that they were buddies all their lives. They were talking, they said, and Ted says to Hans, did you ever lose an underwater mine off the coast of France? He says, no, why is that? Because I found one. And it was really interesting to have these two enemies decades later sitting down and just really going over what the war was like for them. But so
that's another connection that, especially in reading some of the books, that a couple of them we've read. There's a series, it's called Poems from Captured Documents, and John Turner, who does a lot of the veteran town halls, he did the one in Middlesex, and he'll be doing one in Burlington, and he served in Iraq. But it's captured documents from the Vietnam War, and it's all the documents they found in the kit of Vietnamese soldiers and diaries and things like that, and there were poems in there, and they collected all those poems, translated them, put them into this book, and then you read it and you find that their experience is really no different than any experience you've read about of Vietnam veterans. It's same thoughts, same thinking. It's incredible that the average soldier, no matter what side you're on, has many of the same concerns.
You know, what I have found in interviewing a lot of veterans, especially when they let their guard down, especially older veterans, who when they returned home, especially World War II veterans, the men were not supposed to talk about it. Men were supposed to be men, not show feelings, is once they release, like, almost every one of those World War II veterans who served combat, particularly who killed people, they cry, and they said it's the best cry they ever had. My buddy, one of my best friends, died at 93, and he was on here several times, but he had a Japanese flag that he took off somebody, and I don't know why he kept it, because it made him so, like, he finally had me have it translated for him. And he didn't like he appreciated what it said, but it was written on it was letters from his, a message from his family, basically make us proud, come home safely, and Joe got to find out the man's name that he'd killed, and that's to the day he died, that bore heavy on him. So what is this event going to be like?
We're going to have veterans just come up and speak for 10 minutes, and they have up to 10 minutes. Non-political, non-partisan, just explaining what their service is like. Some of the ones in the past have been, people will get up and talk about their pride of service, or somebody will get up and, one I remember from somebody who lives in Linden, just got up and talked about the sense of loss for the people that brothers he lost in combat. Another veteran got up who was never in combat, but his duty was helping to design nuclear missiles for submarines during the Cold War. Another veteran was talking about sitting during the Cuban Missile Crisis, ready to push one of the buttons, and the tension that there is in that, and funny stories like one, I don't know if it was funny, that I had of sitting in the barracks window smoking a cigarette, which they don't do anymore, but really captured sort of a lot of the tension of that time in like the early 70s. There was a race riot going on in the Airmen's Club, and it was like, wow. It's, so there's all sorts of experiences. Another woman who is a nurse in Vietnam, talking about caring for injured soldiers from both sides. So just is a huge range of experiences that most people don't understand that range as well.
Well, it's like one fella around here who most people who didn't know him when he was younger had no idea that he'd served in combat, including, he wasn't an official tunnel rat, but only about like 5'4". He says every once in a while, no tunnel rat around, they say, Gene, down. But he came back from Vietnam prouder so proud. But then he says things fell all apart at the airport. And he says when we were protested, he was then on the airplane, he was treated like a second-class citizen. And he came home, put away his uniform, and put away his memories for several decades. But meanwhile, most people knew him as Gene Tessier, Mr. Basketball. He founded the local basketball group that he ran for 25 years. He's been a bus driver. He's played Santa as well as my friend Winston. And then we held an event, my wife and I held an event for Vietnam veterans quite a number of years ago. And all of a sudden he popped up and started sharing his story. And now he has claimed ownership of being a Vietnam veteran.
Yep.
But
there was a real variety. I mean, I was in during that time, and I never saw any of that anger towards veterans, and it may have been that it was later when I was in 71, 72. And
they were in during the big build-up, 68.
The airport thing you mentioned, so coming into California, that may have been a big piece of it, but I didn't see where I got discharged was out of Texas, and then I hitchhiked to Nebraska where I had friends, then hitchhiked out towards Massachusetts in uniform, and people picked me up all along the way, and it was like, hey, you need a beer, and it was like, there was not really a welcoming, but it was like, I'm glad you're back kind of thing, even though I hadn't really gone anywhere but Texas. But
I think you're probably right, though.
There's variety in that.
I think it probably depends on where you work. He said Vermonters were fine to him. He said, but he said when you get home, and more than one veterans from every war that I've interviewed people in, including even the German soldiers who live here, who lived here, most of them, I think all of them have passed now, is while you were home, is the people around you were fine to them, they said, but it was your way of thinking was so much different than when you got on the airplane. And National Guardsmen, I find, have a particular struggle because if you're a National Guardsman, you come home from combat and you're right back in the community and surrounded by people who have no idea what you went through. But if you were in full time, you'd be go back on base surrounded by people who...
Right, yeah. They really, they've done a better job of working on the transition over time. But they really have to, because one major problem that's been consistent is veteran suicides, and 20 a day. That's a pretty high number when you think about it. And preventing that transition is welcoming back. Part of what the Veteran Town Hall is to do is to let people express themselves, let that out, and let the community understand the difficulty of transition. The difficulty of making that connection. We were talking earlier, and you mentioned one woman and sort of the idea of like where their head is at, and then listening to people talk about just inane little things, it seems, and you're going like, whoa, that's just so ridiculous. And, like I've had students when I worked as a veteran resource advisor that would come in and sit down with me, and they'd say, I don't know. I mean, these kids, they're just like still wet behind the ears. They just don't get it, And I said, well, those kids are actually the same age as you. So, it's your experience that has made a huge difference here. And that trying to get that through that difference and make some kind of a connection is an important piece.
Well, the young woman you were talking about, I'll say her name just because she's been on the show, is Nicole Conley. And she has gone to college to get her degree, but she served 3 heavy, really serious, challenging tours in Baghdad as a military policeman, and she's been very upfront with her PTSD and worries about whether she will survive.
Right.
And she's come on here. She's talked about it. I think she has a very good, she knows her triggers, like she said, like with her, that diesel fuel. She said, because I think it was when they hit roadside thing.
Lights it off.
The diesel fuel just smells. And she said when she went to college, I think they had to have some accommodations because every once in a while, being in a room full of people, you're waiting for somebody to blow you up, and that might be that might work in the combat zone, but not really a lot of need for it back here.
Right. I mean, you're hyper alert, and you've been that way for so long, and then you come back to a place where you don't need to be hyper alert, and it's not abnormal. So I mean, part of the PTSD thing, I think PTS is maybe a better term for it, is it's normal to react the way you do to being in a situation that's full of danger.
Right.
And then when you come back, it just doesn't fit in this environment.
Right.
And so that transition is hard. But the biggest thing is to talk. It's to, that's, I think the reading groups are great. The Veterans Town Hall is a really important piece of that, to just express and reconnect with the rest of the human beings you live with.
Right. And one thing, they always say, yes, talk to them, because contrary to what I mentioned before, a lot of World War II veterans, they actually came home, and the men really did want to talk, but to think most of the time. But society then their belief was, no, don't talk about it because it'll affect you. It will. Right. You don't keep reliving it. And so a lot of them actually they drowned themselves in the bottle. Plus there was also suicides back then.
Yeah, I grew up with all those guys.
Right.
I mean, that was my father and my uncles, and they were the silent men for sure. I mean, my father was 84, and my son and I were down there, and there was a documentary on of World War II, and he's sitting there and he goes, oh yeah, well, I was on that hospital ship, and it's like then everything started coming out when he was 84.
Right.
Things I never knew. And my uncle, who was combat engineer and right in the middle of everything, Battle of the Bulge, the whole bit, I remember we were playing soldier one day, and the cat got hit on the road, and it did not look pretty. And so one of my sisters ran and got my Uncle Bob, to take care of the cat. And he came out with a shovel, and he shoveled it up, and he held it out. And when we're standing there with our toy soldier stuff on, and he goes, "That's what war looks like." And that was the first thing I ever heard from him. But other stories came out later.
Right.
But and he had heart attacks when he was like 40 years old. And so they stuffed it. They kept it in for sure.
Right. And as I was telling you before, I have my other friend who's been on here several times. He just passed away, is Winston Carbonneau. He was 2 tours of Vietnam, heavy combat, platoon sergeant, PTSD. He said until he was finally went to get help, he tried to find the answers in a bottle. Mm-hmm. And he said, I drowned many bottles before I could, and I didn't find that help I needed. Then my psychiatrist, and this isn't anything private, he's been on the show, told him, you got to talk about it. Find somebody who wants to talk about it. Tell them what you went through. Mm-hmm. And he says, ever since he started, he said, every once in a while the enemy still would show up in his dreams, but he said they kept getting further and further away.
The talking about it is important, but the other piece is to have people listen.
Right.
Without judgment.
Absolutely.
And part of what some people don't want to hear, because they don't want to know what you have to do when you're in combat. They don't want to know about that. They maybe want to know about heroic things and stuff, but they don't want to know about what those gritty details are like. But you've got to help the veteran, you've got to just non-judgmentally listen when they have to tell you about those kinds of things, if they want to.
Right.
I mean, that's up to them for sure.
I had a person who thanked me up and down, a World War II veteran, and he never told this to me. He said this to me, and I know this was what haunted him. And after this, his family said he says, how do you rationalize killing somebody, a 15-year-old German soldier, for stealing your blanket? Mm. And He never said it was him, but I believe it was him. And he carried that with him for decades. And once he didn't come right out and say, this is what I did, but it was close enough where he found peace.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, it's important to do that.
Right.
And I think that's a big piece of what can happen at the veteran town halls, for sure.
So again, where is it going to be and when?
It will be at Prouty Park, July 18th, this coming Sunday, and it will begin at 1 o'clock, and it's in the pavilion at Prouty Park. So there'll be a microphone so we can make sure to hear people. There's seating there, but you're welcome to bring folding chairs, depending on how many people that
So the
we
pavilion's right down on the beach.
Right down on the beach,
right.
right.
Down on the beach.
And there's also a website, Vermont Veteran, VermontVetsTownHall.org, and you can go to that website and register to speak. I mean, it's great if we know ahead of time some of the people who will speak, but anybody who's in the audience that may not plan to speak but then decides, hey, I want to get up and say something, they're completely welcome to do that as well.
And I think a lot of times with various, whether it be veterans or especially if it involves emotions, I think a lot of times that's what happens. People listen to other people speak because they go there with full intention on not saying a word. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden somebody looks and say, oh, they can do that. Here, let me stand up.
That happened at when we did it in St. Johnsbury, be 2 years ago now. Chip Troiano, who's a Caledonia County representative, got up and said something, and then he got up another time, and then he got up another time, because the whole atmosphere of sharing your stories just, encouraged him, and it was just some wonderful stuff that he brought forward.
Right. Yeah. You know what I find is one group that I have interviewed, quite a number of it, because there isn't as many who feel like they didn't, quote, do anything, are women. Mm-hmm. Is like, I interviewed a few women who served important roles this side while the men went off, and they said the reason a lot of people didn't know they were in the military, they said, well, we didn't really do anything. Yeah. And, well, one of the women ended up, because she was a nurse, she ended up with TB, and so they had their own they had their jobs. They were truck drivers, but like it wasn't the same as a lot of the men. Yep. But they played equally important roles, just in a different way. And so trying to get some of these women, especially World War II women over the years, to actually tell their story wasn't quite as easy.
It still isn't. I mean, women and men who are in support roles, they understand how important their role was to support the combat operations, or just even during the Cold War, just to make sure, readiness was there. But the key piece that goes through all of this is the idea of service. Right. And the thing that veterans have is that they have done service, and when they come back, they continue to do service. They're the people in the community that you can depend on. They're going to serve.
Right. Well, that's like, and he'll be watching this show and listening to it, is my friend John Wilson. He's I believe he's the longest serving member of the Newport City Council. He got out of Vietnam. And swore he'd never go in the military again, got out in the civilian world, so then this isn't for me. Went back in 20-something years, retired, and he's been serving on the city council for, I think it's 20-something years, and back to the support role. John said, when I was out in the bush, he was a foot soldier, he said, I had no respect for the behind-the-scenes people until I became one of them later on in my career, to realize how valuable those people were. They played a tremendous, valuable role that allowed him to do what he had to do.
Right.
So, how many people do you have? Do you have a lot of people show up, or just?
It varies. At Middlesex, I think there were probably 70 to 100, something like that.
Oh, really?
At when we did it in St. Johnsbury, I would say we probably had about 50 people there.
Right.
We probably had 10 different speakers.
Do you meet with the? Are you in partnership at all with the local service organizations?
The VFW has been great. They've been totally supportive, helpful. I think they're providing the communication system down there, and they've been wonderful. There's a lot of people in the community that help. Just the idea of where to find a good site. People at community college here in Newport, they offered, gave me ideas of where we might do this. So people are always willing to help, and it's been great.
Right. Is there going to be, since it's going to be at the beach, is there a meal, or is this just
There's
speaking?
some snacks and drinks and that kind of thing. Kristen, who does the main organizing around the state for this, she's got something going there. I'm not clear what it was. When we were in St. Johnsbury, there was cider and cheese and crackers, and so that sort of thing would be there.
Right. No, I think it's a great opportunity for people, and that's how come when you reached it, I'm not sure if you or Kristen reached out to me. I pulled out all the stops, and because it was a last minute interview, I said, "All right, let's make this happen."
Yep.
And so I managed to get you on both TV and the radio, hoping that you're going to have a good turnout. And because from as I said, I've never served a day in the military, but I've interviewed enough people to know that they said the secret to surviving is is to know that you are not alone.
Right.
And I think that was something Nicole has said, that veterans need to understand that that they're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
And you might feel alone sometimes, but you're not.
Right.
So, what are your final words you'd like to talk about this event?
Well, we've covered quite a bit, but I think the important thing is just to, the time. It's on Sunday, the 18th at 1 o'clock, and that you can go to VT Vets Town Hall. It's all sort of one big smushed together word like we do nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
.org, and you can register to speak there, or you can get other information about this coming town hall and the other ones that are happening over the state. You can also go to vetstownhall.org, which is the national site, and there's a lot of background information on that site as well.
Right.
So both of those, and I guess my sort of final words is please come, and everybody's welcome, and I hope we have a good turnout.
Okay, well, thank you for coming on, and thank you for doing what you're doing, because I know it's needed, and I suspect it's very appreciated.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay. And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.